I'm Commander Megan Bruno, 43 years old, a Navy aviator they call Phoenix 1. I started as an enlisted mechanic turning wrenches and fought my way up to command flights most people only read about. For years, I trained and mentored younger officers, gave them the guidance and second chances my own mentors once gave me. But one Friday night, an Air Force lieutenant laughed at my uniform and asked if I wore it for attention. I said nothing until his captain turned, saw my patch, and ordered him to apologize. That moment changed more than his tone, it changed how I led. Have you ever been mocked, underestimated, or humiliated by someone who had no idea what you'd done to earn your place? You're not alone. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being disrespected, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about respect, leadership, and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. I sat at the far end of the bar, nursing a bourbon that had gone lukewarm in my hand. The week had been long: flight evaluations, readiness briefings, enough paperwork to fill a cargo hold. Friday night at the O Club felt like the first time in days I'd been able to just breathe. My flight jacket hung open over my khakis, name tape visible, my commander's insignia catching the dim light every time I shifted on the stool. I wasn't trying to advertise anything. I was just too tired to change. The bartender, a retired master chief named Rourke, slid a fresh glass of water my way without asking. He'd been pouring drinks on this base longer than some of the pilots had been alive. He knew when someone needed quiet, and he knew when someone needed company. Tonight, I needed the former. The door swung open behind me, and a burst of laughter rolled in with it. I didn't turn around. Fridays brought everyone out: maintenance crews, ground support, flight officers from every branch stationed here. The noise level rose as boots scraped across the tile floor, chairs dragged out, voices overlapping in that particular cadence of people who'd spent the day being professional and were now aggressively not. "Another round over here, Chief," someone called out, and I heard Rourke sigh before heading down the bar. I glanced up at the mirror behind the bottles. A group of Air Force officers had claimed a table near the dartboard, 3 of them, all in flight suits, all loud. The youngest one, a first lieutenant by the look of his rank, had that energy some new officers get when they've just finished their first few months of real flying and think they've figured out the whole military. He was talking too loud, gesturing too much, and his buddies were egging him on. I went back to my drink. "Hey," a voice said beside me. I looked over. The first lieutenant had wandered up to the bar, waiting for Rourke to finish pouring. He was staring at my jacket, specifically at the patch on my left shoulder. His expression was somewhere between curious and amused. "You wear that uniform for attention," he said, not quite a question, or just to get free drinks. I took a slow sip of bourbon, let the burn settle, then set the glass down. "I wear it because I earned it." He laughed, short, dismissive. "Right. Navy, huh? What do you even fly? Cargo?" Rourke reappeared with a tray of beers, gave the lieutenant a look that could have stripped paint, but said nothing. The kid didn't notice. He was still grinning at me like we were sharing some kind of joke. I didn't bite. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've sat through survival training, hostile territory landings, and joint briefings with egos twice the size of this bar. A drunk lieutenant with an attitude wasn't even on my radar. "Just making conversation," he added, picking up his tray. "Relax." I didn't respond. He walked back to his table, said something to his friends, and they all laughed. I heard the word Navy and something about desk jobs. I kept my eyes on my glass. This wasn't new. I'd been the only woman in rooms full of men more times than I could count. I'd been underestimated, second-guessed, and dismissed by people who assumed my rank was a clerical error. Early in my career, it used to bother me. I'd spend hours replaying conversations, wondering if I should have said something sharper, stood taller, made them see me differently. But somewhere along the way, I stopped caring what people assumed. My record spoke for itself. My missions spoke for themselves. And the people who mattered, the ones I flew with, commanded, trusted, they knew exactly who I was. Still, nights like this reminded me how far some parts of the culture still had to go. I finished my drink and signaled Rourke for the check. He waved me off. On the house, Commander. Rourke, on the house, he repeated, firm. I nodded my thanks, slid a 20 under the glass anyway, and stood. My knees protested slightly. Long week, long career. I was halfway to the door when I heard the voice again. Leaving already? Guess the Navy's got an early bedtime. I stopped. Not because I was offended. Not because I was angry. I stopped because I recognized something in his tone, that careless entitlement that comes from never having been checked. He wasn't malicious. He was ignorant. And ignorance, left uncorrected, becomes arrogance. I turned around. The first lieutenant was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, grin still plastered on his face. His two buddies looked less sure now. One of them, a captain, had gone quiet, eyes flicking between me and the lieutenant like he was starting to realize something wasn't adding up. You have a good night, Lieutenant, I said evenly and walked out. The air outside was cool, clean, a relief after the stale warmth of the bar. I pulled my jacket closed and headed toward the parking lot, boots crunching on gravel. Overhead, the sky was clear, stars scattered thick and bright the way they only get on bases far from city lights. I'd spent half my career looking up at skies like this, first as a student pilot, then as a junior officer, then as a commander leading missions I still couldn't talk about in public. I thought about my father. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Bruneau retired. He'd enlisted young, stayed in for 30 years, and taught me everything that mattered about service. Not the textbook stuff, the real things. Like how respect isn't something you demand, it's something you build. How your word is the only currency that matters. How the uniform isn't a costume or a shield, it's a responsibility. He used to say, Megan, you can't control what people think of you. But you can control what you do when they're wrong. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. My phone buzzed, text from Sarah Klein, my colleague and one of the few people I trusted to tell me the truth even when it stung. Heard there was a scene at the O Club. You good? I typed back, fine. Just another Friday. She replied immediately, need backup. No. I'm heading home. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced back at the bar. Through the window, I could see the first lieutenant still holding court at his table, animated, oblivious. The captain beside him had his head down, talking on his phone. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the one where I walked away without a word, was about to become the least important part of the story. Because 20 minutes later, when I was halfway home, my phone rang. It was Rourke. Commander, he said, voice tight, you might want to know, Captain Adler just tore that lieutenant a new one. Apparently he finally saw your patch. Phoenix 1. He made the kid stand at attention in front of the whole bar and apologize to an empty room. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, he didn't need to do that. Yeah, well, he did. Thought you should know. I thanked him and hung up. Phoenix 1. I hadn't heard that call sign spoken out loud in months. It wasn't something I advertised. It was something I'd earned in a way that still woke me up some nights. Fire, smoke, a cockpit full of alarms, and a crew trusting me to get them home. I did. Barely. And somewhere in a file cabinet at Nevers, there was an after-action report with my name on it and a commendation I never framed. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and dark. I thought about that lieutenant, young, cocky, clueless. I thought about Captain Adler, whoever he was, stepping in when he didn't have to. And I thought about what came next. Because this wasn't over. It never was. Not really. Respect isn't given by rank or by age. It's built, one choice at a time. Even at a bar. Even off-duty. It still matters who you are when no one's watching. I turned onto Base Housing Road and headed home. The email came through at 06:30 Saturday morning, marked priority but not urgent. Subject line, Informal Incident Report, O Club, October 22nd. I read it twice, standing in my kitchen in sweatpants and an old Academy hoodie, coffee going cold in my hand. Captain Thomas Adler, United States Air Force, had filed a courtesy notification about the previous night's interaction. Professional, concise, apologetic in tone but not groveling. He explained that First Lieutenant Ryan Cooper had engaged in conduct unbecoming and that corrective action had been taken immediately. He CC'd his squadron commander and requested a brief meeting at my convenience to discuss inter-service professionalism standards. I set the phone down and stared out the window. The sun was just breaking over the flight line, painting the tarmac orange and gold. Somewhere out there, crews were prepping birds for morning sorties, running checklists, doing the work that mattered. And here I was, dealing with the aftermath of a drunk lieutenant's bad judgment. I didn't want to make this bigger than it was. But I also knew that if I ignored it, the message sent would be worse than the original offense. So I typed a reply, Captain Adler, thank you for the follow-up. I'm available Monday at 1300 hours, Building 7, my office. Respectfully, CDR Bruno. I hit send and went for a run. By Monday afternoon, I'd almost forgotten about it. Almost. I'd spent the weekend reviewing squadron readiness reports, prepping for a joint exercise scheduled in 3 weeks, and dodging calls from Sarah, who wanted the full story and wasn't buying my "it's fine" routine. When 1300 hours rolled around, I was in my office, door open, halfway through a logistics brief when Captain Adler knocked. Commander Bruno? He stood in the doorway, cover tucked under his arm, posture parade ground straight. Early 30s, clean-cut, the kind of bearing that said he'd been doing this job long enough to know when he'd screwed up by proximity. Come in, Captain. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat, set his cover on his knee, and waited. I didn't make him wait long. I appreciate the report, I said. And I appreciate you addressing it in the moment. That said, I'm not interested in making this a formal issue. He blinked, surprised. Ma'am, with respect, what Lieutenant Cooper said was out of line. If you want to pursue, I don't. I leaned back in my chair. He's young. He made a mistake. You corrected him. That's how it's supposed to work. Adler nodded slowly, but I could see him thinking, weighing whether to push. Finally, permission to speak freely, ma'am? Granted. This isn't the first time I've seen this kind of thing. Junior officers fresh out of training, thinking they've got it all figured out, talking down to anyone who isn't in their branch or doesn't fit their picture of what a pilot looks like. It's a culture problem. And if we don't address it, it's going to get worse. I studied him for a moment. He wasn't wrong. I'd seen it too, ego unchecked, respect treated like a suggestion, the slow erosion of the kind of professionalism that used to be non-negotiable. And the worst part was, it wasn't malice. It was ignorance. People who'd never served alongside someone different from them, never had their assumptions challenged, never learned that the rank on someone's collar meant something regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. What are you proposing? I asked. A training session. Cross-branch respect and professionalism. Mandatory for all 01 through 03s. Led by senior officers from each service. Make it clear that this isn't optional, and it's not a joke. I considered it. It wasn't a bad idea. It was actually a good one. But it would take time, coordination, buy-in from leadership across multiple commands. And it would mean putting myself in front of a room full of junior officers and explaining why respect mattered, which meant explaining what had happened at the bar, even if I didn't name names. I'll think about it, I said. Adler stood. Thank you, ma'am. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry you had to deal with that. You're not responsible for his behavior, Captain. No, ma'am. But I'm responsible for making sure it doesn't happen again. He saluted. I returned it. And then he was gone, and I was alone in my office again, staring at the stack of readiness reports and thinking about what it meant to fix a culture one conversation at a time. That night, I called my father. He'd been retired for 5 years, living in a small house in Virginia, spending his days fishing and rebuilding old motorcycles. But he still answered the phone like he was standing watch. Bruno. Hey, Dad. His voice softened immediately. Megan. You okay? I told him what happened. Not the details, he didn't need those. Just the outline. A young officer who didn't know better. A moment of disrespect. A correction. A conversation about what came next. He listened without interrupting, the way he always did. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, you remember what I told you when you made 05? You told me a lot of things. I told you that the higher you go, the more people are going to test you. Not because they don't respect you, because they don't understand what you've done to get there. and your job isn't to prove yourself to them. It's to teach them what respect actually means. I closed my eyes. I know. So, what are you going to do? I don't know yet. Yes, you do, he said gently. You've always known. You're just deciding if you want to do the easy thing or the right thing. I smiled despite myself. The right thing's never easy, is it? Not once in 30 years. He paused. But it's always worth it. We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing, about everything. When I hung up, I felt steadier, clearer. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to Captain Adler and my own chain of command. Subject line, proposal, Joint Service Professionalism Training Initiative. I wrote for an hour, refining the language, outlining objectives, proposing timelines. When I finally hit send, it was past 2200 hours. I shut down the computer, turned off the lights, and walked out into the cool night air. Somewhere on base, Lieutenant Cooper was probably asleep, maybe still embarrassed, maybe already forgetting what happened. Somewhere else, Captain Adler was probably awake, thinking about the same things I was. And somewhere in Virginia, my father was probably sitting on his porch, looking up at the same stars I was looking at now, knowing his daughter was doing exactly what he'd taught her to do. Not retaliation. Correction. Not anger. Accountability. Not proving a point. Building something better. I walked home slowly, hands in my pockets, and let the weight of the decision settle. This was going to be harder than I wanted it to be. But that had never stopped me before. I was 12 years old the first time my father took me to see an air show at Naval Air Station Oceana. We stood on the flight line in the blazing July heat, my hand tucked into his, watching F-14 Tomcats scream overhead in formation, so tight it looked like they were stitched together. The noise was overwhelming, pure thunder that rattled my chest and made my ears ring for hours afterward. But I didn't care. I couldn't look away. You see that, my father said, pointing at the lead aircraft as it banked hard, vapor trails spiraling off the wingtips. That's precision. That's trust. Every person in that cockpit, every person on the ground, they're all part of the same mission. I nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling it anyway. The weight of it. The importance. You could do that, he said. If you wanted to. I looked up at him, squinting against the sun. Really? Really? He squeezed my hand. But it's not just about flying. It's about service. About being part of something bigger than yourself. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped thinking about what I wanted to be and started thinking about who I wanted to become. I enlisted at 18, straight out of high school, despite my father's quiet suggestion that I consider college first. I was impatient, stubborn, convinced I needed to prove myself the hard way. Boot camp was hell. The instructors were relentless, the standards unforgiving, and I spent more nights than I care to admit crying into my pillow, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But I didn't quit. I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, I heard my father's voice. You can do this. You just have to decide if you're willing to. I was. After boot camp, I served as an aviation machinist's mate, fixing engines, learning systems, spending 18-hour shifts elbow-deep in hydraulic fluid and jet fuel. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And it taught me something crucial. Respect isn't about rank. It's about competence. The senior chiefs I worked under didn't care that I was young or that I was a woman. They cared whether I could do the job. And when I proved I could, they taught me everything they knew. 3 years in, my division officer, Lieutenant Sarah Klein, sharp as a blade and twice as tough, pulled me aside after a particularly brutal maintenance cycle. Bruno, she said, you ever think about commissioning? I blinked. Ma'am? Officer Candidate School. You've got the aptitude, the work ethic, and the leadership instinct. You're wasting your potential turning wrenches. I didn't know what to say. I'd never considered it. Officers were a different breed, college-educated, polished, the kind of people who seemed born to lead. I was just a mechanic from a Navy family, trying to make my father proud. Think about it, she said. And when you're ready, come find me. I'll write the recommendation myself. 6 months later, I applied. A year after that, I was at OCS in Newport, Rhode Island, learning how to salute, how to march, How to make decisions under pressure that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. It was harder than boot camp. Harder than anything I'd done. But I graduated top 10 in my class, and when they pinned the ensign's bars on my collar, my father was there, standing in the back of the room in his dress blues, smiling so hard I thought his face might crack. "Proud of you, kid," he said afterward, voice thick. "I learned from the best," I told him. Flight school came next. Pensacola, then Corpus Christi, then back to Oceana for advanced training. I learned to fly the F/A-18 fast, unforgiving, a machine that demanded everything you had and punished hesitation. I loved it. I loved the feeling of pulling 5GS in a hard turn, loved the clarity that came from having 100 things to monitor and knowing exactly which one mattered most in any given second. I loved being part of a squadron, a team, a mission. My call sign came during a training exercise in my second fleet tour. We were running simulated close air support, and I was leading a two-ship section when my wingman took simulated damage and had to ART-B. I stayed on station, completed the mission solo, and landed with fuel gauges reading so low the ground crew couldn't believe I'd made it back. My squadron commander, a salty old lieutenant commander named Briggs, looked at me in the debrief and said, "You just rose from the ashes, Bruno. Phoenix. That's you." It stuck. And 3 years later, it became official in the worst possible way. We were flying a reconnaissance mission in contested airspace, details I still can't share, location I still can't name. What I can say is this: we took fire. Heavy fire. My aircraft was hit, systems failing, alarm screaming, and I had 3 crew members depending on me to get them home. I didn't think. I just flew. I kept that bird in the air through sheer will and muscle memory, nursing it across the border, wheels down in friendly territory with the airframe so damaged it was declared unsalvageable. The after-action report called it extraordinary airmanship under combat conditions. My crew called it a miracle. I called it luck. But the call sign stuck, and Phoenix 1 became part of my record, part of my identity. Over the next decade, I climbed. Lieutenant to lieutenant, commander to commander. I led squadrons, ran training programs, served as liaison to joint operations with the Air Force, the Army, the Marines. I worked alongside officers from every branch, every background, and I learned that the best ones, the ones who really understood what service meant, never cared about the uniform someone wore. They cared about the job getting done. But I also saw the cracks. The new generation of officers coming in with more confidence than experience, more ego than empathy. The slow drift away from the standards my father's generation had held sacred. And I saw the way some of them looked at me, at women, at anyone who didn't fit the mold they expected, and I knew that if I didn't do something, the culture I loved would rot from the inside. So when Captain Adler proposed the cross-branch training initiative, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Because this wasn't about me. It wasn't about a drunk lieutenant at a bar. It was about making sure the next generation understood what my father had taught me 25 years ago. Service is bigger than yourself, respect is earned through action, and the uniform you wear is a responsibility, not a right. I sat at my desk late that night, looking at the framed photo on the shelf, me and my father, the day I made commander, both of us in dress blues, both of us grinning. He'd passed 2 years later. Heart attack. Sudden. I didn't get to say goodbye. But I knew what he'd say if he were here. He'd say, "You know what you have to do, Megan. Now go do it." I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and walked out into the night. The flight line was quiet, the hangars dark, the sky full of stars. Somewhere out there, young pilots were training, learning, becoming the officers who'd lead the next generation. And I was going to make sure they learned the right lessons. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the bar scene in my head, not the confrontation itself, but the moment after. The moment I chose to walk away. In the moment, it had felt like the right call. Professional. Mature. The kind of restraint my father would have approved of. But lying in bed at 0200, staring at the ceiling, I wasn't sure anymore. Maybe walking away had been the problem. Maybe silence looked like acceptance. Maybe that lieutenant, Ryan Cooper, I'd learned his name from Adler's report. Maybe he'd gone home thinking he'd won something. Thinking disrespect without consequences was just the way things worked. I got up, made coffee I didn't need, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up the draft proposal I'd sent to Adler and my chain of command. Read it again. Refined it. Added a section on accountability, not punitive measures, but real accountability. The kind that required people to look at their behavior and understand why it mattered. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. Not just a training session. A program. Something structured, ongoing, built into the pipeline for junior officers across all branches. It would take months to implement. Maybe longer. But it would be worth it. At 0730, my phone rang. It was Rear Admiral Robert Hayes, my immediate superior and the man who'd recommended me for commander 3 years ago. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Bruno, I read your proposal. Sir, it's ambitious. Probably too ambitious. You know how much red tape this is going to hit? Yes, sir. A pause. Then, quieter, but it's also exactly what we need. I'll back it. But you're going to have to sell it. To my boss, to the Air Wing commander, to every skeptical O6 who thinks this is a waste of time. You ready for that? I thought about my father. About Sarah Klein. About every junior officer I'd mentored over the years, the ones who got it and the ones who didn't. Yes, sir. I'm ready. Good. I'll set up the meetings. Expect pushback. Expect resistance. But keep pushing. Understood. Understood. He hung up. I sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand, feeling the weight of what I'd just committed to. Then I called Sarah. It's 0745, she said by way of greeting. This better be important. I need your help. Always. What's going on? I told her. The whole thing. The bar, the proposal, the Admiral's support, the meetings ahead. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a beat. You're really doing this, she said. I'm really doing this. Okay, I'm in. What do you need? Perspective. Backup. Someone who'll tell me if I'm overreacting. You're not overreacting, she said immediately. If anything, you're underreacting. This should have been addressed years ago. You're just the first person with the guts to actually do it. I exhaled. Thanks. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be a fight. You know that, right? I know. Good. Then let's get to work. Over the next week, I lived in conference rooms. Briefings with the Admiral. Coordination calls with Air Force and Marine Corps leadership. Meetings with junior officers who'd be affected by the new training requirements. Some were supportive. Some were skeptical. A few were outright hostile. Why did they need to sit through a class on respect? They already knew how to be professional. I didn't argue. I just asked questions. How many women are in your squadron? How many officers from other branches have you worked with directly? When's the last time you had a conversation about what professionalism actually means? Most of them didn't have good answers. And in their silence, I found the justification I needed. The hardest meeting was with Lieutenant Cooper himself. I didn't request it, Captain Adler did, as part of Cooper's remediation plan. I agreed reluctantly, unsure what I was supposed to say to someone who dismissed me so casually a week ago. We met in a neutral office, just the two of us. Cooper stood when I entered, posture rigid, face pale. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Commander Bruno, he said stiffly. Thank you for meeting with me. I gestured to the chair. Sit. He sat. I stayed standing. Lieutenant, I said, I'm not here to make you feel worse than you already do. But I am here to make sure you understand why this matters. He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. You made a judgment about me based on nothing. You saw a uniform, a woman, and you assumed I didn't belong. That I was there for attention, or for drinks, or for some reason other than the same one you were there, because I'd earned the right to be there. His jaw tightened. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, where I've been, or what I've sacrificed to wear this uniform. And that's fine, you're not supposed to. But what you are supposed to do is assume competence until proven otherwise. You're supposed to extend the same respect to every officer, every sailor, every airman you meet, regardless of branch, gender, or anything else. That's baseline. That's non-negotiable. He finally looked up. Ma'am, I didn't think. I know you didn't. That's the problem. Silence. Then, quieter. I'm sorry. I really am. I studied him. He looked genuinely miserable. Maybe even genuinely sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. Lieutenant, I don't need your apology. I need your commitment. Commit to doing better. Commit to holding yourself to a higher standard. Commit to calling out this behavior when you see it in others, even when it's uncomfortable. Can you do that? He straightened. Yes, ma'am. I can. Good. Because Captain Adler has assigned you to assist with the new training program we're developing. You're going to help build the curriculum, coordinate schedules, and if you prove you understand what we're trying to accomplish, you're going to help teach it. His eyes widened. Ma'am, you made a mistake. Now you're going to help fix the culture that allowed it. Questions? No, ma'am. Dismissed. He stood, saluted, and left. I sat down in the chair he'd vacated and let out a long breath. Sarah was right. This was going to be a fight. But it was also going to be worth it. That night, I drove out to the edge of base, to the overlook where you could see the entire flight line stretched out under the stars. I used to come here as a junior officer when the weight of responsibility felt too heavy and I needed to remember why I'd chosen this life. I thought about my father, about the lessons he'd taught me, about the culture he'd been part of, imperfect, flawed, but built on a foundation of real respect, real accountability. And I thought about the officers coming up now, the ones who'd never known that culture, who'd grown up in a world where respect was optional and accountability was rare. They deserved better. We all did. I pulled out my phone and sent one more email before heading home. Subject line, training program, volunteer instructors needed. Body, looking for senior officers across all branches willing to teach junior officers what service really means. No prepared remarks. Just real conversations. Let me know if you're in. By the time I got home, I had 12 responses. By morning, I had 30. Maybe this wasn't going to be as hard as I thought. Or maybe it was going to be harder, and I just had more help than I realized. The first training session was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-November, 0800 hours, in the base theater. Attendance was mandatory for all 01 through 03 officers across Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps units stationed on base, roughly 120 people crammed into a room designed for 80. The air conditioning was struggling, the seats were uncomfortable, and I could feel the skepticism radiating from the back rows before I even stepped to the podium. Captain Adler stood beside me, along with Major Jason Lee from the Air Force and Lieutenant Commander Sarah Klein representing Navy junior officers. We'd spent 3 weeks building this curriculum, arguing over every slide, every talking point, every example. The goal wasn't to lecture. It was to facilitate, create space for real conversation about respect, professionalism, and what it meant to serve alongside people who didn't look like you or come from the same background. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. Most faces were neutral. A few looked genuinely interested. And in the third row, Lieutenant Ryan Cooper sat ramrod straight, notebook open, pen ready. "Good morning," I said. "I'm Commander Megan Bruno, U.S. Navy. I know none of you want to be here." A ripple of surprised laughter. "You've got flights to prep, paperwork to finish, 100 things more important than sitting in this room listening to senior officers tell you how to behave." "I get it. I've been in your seat. But here's the thing, this session exists because we've failed you." That got their attention. We failed to teach you what respect actually looks like in a joint environment. We failed to model the kind of professionalism that used to be standard. And we've failed to hold ourselves and each other accountable when we fall short. So this isn't about punishing anyone. It's about fixing a culture that's been broken for too long. I clicked to the next slide, a photo of my father in his dress blues, standing on the deck of a carrier. This is Chief Petty Officer Daniel Bruno. My father. He served 30 years, and he taught me that the uniform you wear is bigger than you. It represents every person who wore it before you, every person who'll wear it after, and every mission you'll ever be part of. When you disrespect the uniform, yours or anyone else's, you're not just disrespecting a person. You're disrespecting the institution. I let that sit for a moment, then moved on. We covered scenarios, real situations that had happened on base, anonymized but recognizable. An Army major dismissed by Navy officers during a briefing. A female Marine pilot questioned about her qualifications by an Air Force lieutenant. An enlisted airman correcting a junior officer and being told to stay in his lane. After each scenario, we broke into small groups. The officers talked, haltingly at first, then more openly. Some defended the behavior. Others pushed back. A few shared their own experiences of being dismissed, underestimated, disrespected. And slowly, the room shifted. The skepticism didn't disappear, but it cracked. People started listening. During the break, a young Navy ensign, Emily Carter, fresh out of the academy, approached me. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you?" "I mean, when someone disrespects you, how do you not just lose it? How do you stay calm?" I smiled. "I don't always. But I've learned that anger doesn't change minds. Clarity does. When someone disrespects you, they're usually not trying to be malicious. They're ignorant. And you can't fix ignorance with rage. You fix it with facts, with professionalism, and with the kind of presence that makes them realize they made a mistake." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense. But, Emily, don't confuse calm with acceptance. You can be professional and still demand respect. You can be composed and still hold people accountable. Those aren't contradictions. They're requirements." "Yes, ma'am." The second half of the session was led by Captain Adler and Major Lee. They talked about cross-branch dynamics, the importance of understanding each service's culture, and the mistakes they'd made in their own careers. It was good. Real. The kind of honesty that made the junior officers sit up and pay attention. At the end, I opened the floor for questions. Silence at first. Then a hand went up, First Lieutenant Cooper. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, "I want to apologize. Publicly. A few weeks ago, I disrespected you at the O Club. I made assumptions based on nothing, and I was wrong. I'm grateful you gave me the chance to be part of this program instead of ending my career. And I want everyone here to know, this matters. Don't make the mistake I made." The room went quiet. I met his eyes, nodded once. "Thank you, Lieutenant." Another hand. A Marine captain. "Commander, what happens if we see this behavior and don't call it out? Are we complicit?" "Yes," I said simply. Silence is endorsement. If you see disrespect and say nothing, you're telling everyone in the room that it's acceptable. And that makes you part of the problem. More questions. More discussion. By the time we wrapped at 1100 hours, the energy in the room had completely shifted. Officers lingered, talking to each other, to us, asking for resources, suggesting additional topics. A few thanked me directly. One Air Force major told me he wished they'd done this when he was a lieutenant. Sarah found me afterward in the hallway. That went better than expected. It did. Think it'll stick? Some of it. Not all of it. But some is better than none. She nodded. You did good, Megan. I didn't respond. I was watching Lieutenant Cooper through the doorway, talking animatedly with a group of ensigns, gesturing, explaining something. He looked different. Less cocky. More thoughtful. Maybe people could change. Maybe culture could shift. Maybe this whole thing wasn't a waste of time after all. That night, I got an email from Rear Admiral Hayes. Subject line, well done. Body, Bruno, heard the session was a success. Comnaver wants to expand the program fleet-wide. Expect a call next week. You've started something important. Don't stop now. Hayes, I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. My father used to say that leadership wasn't about one big decision. It was about 1,000 small ones, made consistently over time. This was one of those small decisions. And tomorrow there'd be another. And another after that. But tonight, I let myself feel it, the small, quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done something that mattered. I thought about that bar. About the lieutenant's smirk. About walking away. And I realized, walking away hadn't been weakness. It had been the beginning. 3 months later, I found myself standing in a different briefing room, this time at Naval Air Station Lemoore, delivering the same training to a fresh group of skeptical junior officers. The program had expanded faster than I'd anticipated, 8 bases so far, with requests coming in from 3 more. It was exhausting. It was necessary. And it was working. Not perfectly. Not universally. But working. I'd started tracking metrics. Pre- and post-training surveys. Incident reports filed. Anonymous feedback. The data was messy, incomplete, but trending positive. Fewer complaints about cross-branch friction. More junior officers reporting feeling respected regardless of service or background. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. What I hadn't anticipated was how much the program would change me. I'd spent 20 years focused on missions, flying, leading, executing. The work was concrete. You either completed the objective or you didn't. But this was different. This was about influence, not orders. About shaping culture, not commanding it. And it required a different kind of patience, a different kind of leadership. I was assigned as liaison to a joint air wing preparing for exercises in the Pacific, a 6-week rotation that would involve coordinating Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps assets across multiple platforms. It was the kind of assignment I used to love. High stakes, complex logistics, real operational impact. But now it felt different. I wasn't just there to coordinate missions. I was there to watch how people treated each other, to model the behavior I'd been teaching, to intervene when necessary. The first week, I saw Captain Adler again. He was part of the Air Force contingent, commanding a fighter squadron. We crossed paths in the operations center, and he gave me a slight nod. "Commander. Good to see you." "Likewise, Captain. Heard the training program's going well." "It's getting there." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I also heard you're up for 06. Congratulations." I blinked. "It's not official." "It will be. Your record's spotless. And after this training initiative, you've got visibility at levels most commanders never see. You've earned it." I didn't know what to say. Promotion to Captain 06 had been a distant goal for years. Something I hoped for but never assumed. The selection board wouldn't meet for another month. But if Adler had heard rumors, they probably had weight. "Thank you," I said finally. He smiled. "Just make sure you don't forget us lowly 03s when you're running the fleet." I laughed. "I'll try my best." To my surprise, Lieutenant Cooper was also part of the rotation. He'd been reassigned to a Joint Strike Fighter squadron, and from what I could tell, he'd taken the lessons from our training seriously. He was quieter now. More deliberate. The cockiness had been replaced with something steadier, confidence, but earned, not assumed. 2 weeks into the rotation, we had a near miss during a training sortie. A miscommunication between the control tower and a Marine F-35 pilot almost resulted in a midair collision. No one was hurt, but it was close enough that we grounded operations for 24 hours to conduct a full investigation. The debrief was tense. The Marine pilot was defensive. The controller was frustrated. And the senior officers were trying to figure out who to blame. I sat in the back, listening. And then I stood. With respect, I said, "This isn't about blame. It's about process. We've got 3 branches operating on slightly different communication protocols, using slightly different terminology, and we're expecting perfect coordination without addressing those gaps. That's a systemic failure, not a personnel failure." The room went quiet. The operations officer, a Navy captain, looked at me. "What are you proposing, Commander?" "A joint communication review. Standardize the terminology we're using for this rotation. Run tabletop exercises before every sortie to make sure everyone's on the same page. And stop treating cross-branch coordination like it's optional." He considered it, then nodded. "Do it. You've got 48 hours. I spent the next 2 days buried in technical manuals, running drills, and mediating arguments between officers who were convinced their services way was the right way. It was tedious. It was frustrating. But it worked. When we resumed operations, the miscommunications dropped to near zero. And more importantly, the officers started trusting each other. One night, after a particularly long day, I found Lieutenant Cooper on the flight line, doing a post-flight inspection. He looked up as I approached. "Commander." "Evening." "Evening, Lieutenant. Everything okay with your bird?" "Yes, ma'am. Just making sure." I nodded, stood beside him in the dim light. After a moment, he spoke again. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you ever regret it? Not making a bigger deal out of what happened at the bar. I thought about it. No. If I'd pushed for formal discipline, you'd have been reprimanded. Maybe passed over for promotion. Maybe pushed out of the service. And then what? You'd be gone, but the problem would still exist. This way, you're here. You're better. And you're part of the solution. He nodded slowly. I don't know if I'd have been that generous. It's not generosity. It's strategy. I don't need vengeance. I need a culture that works. He smiled faintly. Well, for what it's worth, thank you. Just keep doing the work, Lieutenant. Yes, ma'am. By the end of the rotation, something had shifted. The joint operations ran smoother. The cross-branch coordination was seamless. And when we debriefed with senior leadership, the feedback was unanimously positive. The Air Wing commander, a Marine Corps colonel, pulled me aside afterward. Bruno, I don't know what you did, but this was the smoothest joint exercise I've seen in 15 years. Whatever you're teaching, keep teaching it. Yes, sir. When I returned to base, there was an official letter waiting in my inbox. Subject line, notification of promotion selection. I opened it, hands steadier than I expected. Commander Megan Bruno, U.S. Navy, you have been selected for promotion to Captain, 06. Congratulations on this well-deserved recognition of your service and leadership. I read it 3 times. Then I called Sarah. You made Captain, she said before I could speak. How did you? I have sources. Congratulations, Megan. Seriously. This is huge. Thanks. You okay? You don't sound excited. I thought about it. I am. I keep thinking about how much work there still is. How far we still have to go. You can't fix everything, Megan. I know. But I can fix some things. And that has to be enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then, it is enough. Trust me. That night, I sat alone in my quarters, looking at the letter. Captain. 06. The rank my father had once told me was reserved for people who'd proven they could lead not just missions, but people. I thought about him, about everything he'd taught me, everything he'd sacrificed to give me this opportunity. And I thought about Lieutenant Cooper, standing on that flight line, asking if I regretted showing mercy. I didn't. Because this was never about one person. It was about all of us. Every officer, every sailor, every airman trying to do their job with honor and integrity. And if I could help build a culture where that was possible, where respect was baseline, not aspirational, then every difficult conversation, every exhausting training session, every moment of doubt was worth it. I folded the letter carefully and set it on my desk. Tomorrow, there'd be more work. More sessions to teach. More officers to mentor. More culture to shift. But tonight, I let myself rest. And I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we were moving in the right direction. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for mid-April, a clear spring morning with enough wind to make the flags snap crisp and loud. I stood in dress whites on the parade ground, surrounded by officers from every branch, enlisted personnel who'd served under my command, and a handful of civilians, friends, colleagues, people who'd been part of my life long enough to earn a spot at something like this. Sarah Klein stood to my left, holding the captain's shoulder boards in a small wooden box. Rear Admiral Hayes stood at the podium, reading the official citation. I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about my father, wishing he could be here, knowing he'd be proud, but also knowing he'd tell me not to get too comfortable. Rank is responsibility, he used to say. The higher you go, the more people depend on you to get it right. The Admiral finished reading and gestured for me to step forward. Sarah opened the box, and together she and Hayes removed my commander's shoulder boards and replaced them with the captain's insignia, 4 stripes, the gold catching sunlight. The weight felt the same, but the meaning didn't. Congratulations, Captain Bruno, Hayes said, stepping back to salute. I returned it, sharp and precise, then turned to face the assembled formation. Applause rippled through the ranks, polite, professional, but genuine. I scanned the crowd and spotted Captain Adler near the back, standing beside Lieutenant Cooper. Both were smiling. Both saluted. I nodded in return. The reception afterward was held in the Officers' Club, The same building where this whole mess had started 6 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, making small talk with people I'd known for years and some I'd just met. Everyone wanted to know what was next. New assignment? New command? Was I staying at this base or transferring? I deflected most of the questions. The truth was, I didn't know yet. My orders wouldn't come through for another few weeks. But I suspected I'd be assigned to a senior staff position, something administrative, something that would take me out of the cockpit for good. It was the natural progression. It was also the part of the job I'd been dreading. Sarah found me near the bar, handed me a glass of water. You look miserable. I'm not miserable. You're absolutely miserable. I sighed. I don't want to be a desk officer, Sarah. I don't want to spend the next 5 years in briefings and budget reviews. Then don't. It's not that simple. It is, actually. You've spent 20 years proving you can fly, fight, and lead. Now you get to decide what kind of leader you want to be for the next phase. You can push for an operational command. You can stay involved in training and reform. Or you can let them stick you in a Pentagon cubicle and call it a career. Your choice. I looked at her. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. You just don't listen. I laughed, genuinely, for the first time all day. Fair point. Later, Captain Adler approached, Cooper trailing a step behind. Adler extended his hand. Captain Bruno. Congratulations. Well deserved. Thank you, Captain. Cooper cleared his throat. Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. I've been recommended for promotion to captain. Early. My CO said it's because of the work I did on the training program. I studied him. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. Older. Steadier. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You earned it. I wouldn't have without your help. You earned it by doing the work. Don't diminish that. He nodded, then hesitated. Ma'am, can I ask, what you said that night about building a culture that works, do you think we're actually doing it? Or are we just pretending? It was a good question. An honest one. I thought about the training sessions, the feedback surveys, the quiet conversations I'd had with junior officers who were finally starting to feel seen, respected, valued. And I thought about all the places we still hadn't reached, all the officers who still didn't get it, all the work that remained. I think we're doing both, I said finally. We're building something real. But we're also performing for people who need to see progress before they'll believe it's possible. And that's okay. Sometimes you have to fake it until it becomes real. Adler smiled. That's surprisingly pragmatic, ma'am. 20 years in uniform teaches you pragmatism, Captain. As the reception wound down, I found myself standing alone near the window, looking out at the flight line. The sun was setting, painting the tarmac in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, a new generation of pilots was prepping for night training, running checklists, trusting their wingmen, doing the work that mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Captain Bruno, this is Major Ryan Cooper. Just wanted to say congratulations again, and to let you know the training program is being adopted at Nellis and Hickam. You started something that's going to outlast both of us. Thank you for not giving up on me. RC, I read it twice, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Major Cooper. He'd been promoted ahead of schedule, just like he said. And he was still doing the work. Sarah appeared beside me. You ready to go? Almost. I turned back to the window. You ever think about what we're leaving behind? Not the missions or the medals. The culture. The example. Every day, she said quietly. But I also think about what we're building. And I think it's better than what we inherited. I nodded. She was right. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was better. And maybe that was enough. We walked out together into the cooling evening air. The parking lot was mostly empty now, just a few stragglers loading into cars, heading home. I unlocked my car but didn't get in right away. I stood there, looking back at the building, the same building where a drunk lieutenant had mocked my service 6 months ago, where I'd had to decide whether to walk away or make a scene. I'd walked away. And in walking away, I'd created space for something bigger than anger, bigger than retaliation. I'd created space for change. My father used to say that the best leaders were the ones who made themselves obsolete, who built systems and cultures strong enough to survive without them. I didn't know if I'd achieved that yet, but I was trying. And I'd keep trying, one conversation at a time, one training session at a time, one officer at a time. I got in the car and drove home slowly, windows down, letting the wind clear my head. Tomorrow, there'd be new responsibilities, new challenges, new officers who needed mentoring, new systems that needed fixing, new battles that needed fighting. But tonight, I let myself rest. And I let myself believe that the work I'd done, the work we'd all done, mattered. Because respect isn't given by rank or by age. It's built, one choice at a time. Even at a bar. Even off-duty. It still matters fewer when no one's watching. The orders came through 3 weeks later. I was being assigned to Naval Air Forces Command in San Diego as Deputy Commander for Training and Readiness, a senior staff position with direct oversight of pilot training programs across the entire Pacific Fleet. It was exactly the kind of desk job I'd been dreading, except for one critical detail. I'd have authority to implement the cross-branch training program fleet-wide. I read the orders twice, then called Sarah. "They gave you what you wanted," she said. "They gave me a chance to scale it." "That's not the same thing." "Close enough." "You taking it?" "Do I have a choice?" "You always have a choice, Megan. You can request a different assignment. You can push for an operational command. Or you can take this and build something that outlasts your career." I was quiet for a moment. Then, when did this become about legacy? The moment you decided to care about more than just your own career. Welcome to senior leadership. It's terrible and you're going to hate parts of it, but you're also going to change things that matter. She wasn't wrong. I reported to San Diego in early June. The headquarters building was massive, 4 stories of glass and concrete, filled with staff officers pushing paper, running numbers, coordinating operations across thousands of miles of ocean. It was everything I'd feared. Fluorescent lights, conference rooms, PowerPoint briefings that could have been emails. But it was also where decisions were made, where policy was written, where culture was shaped at a scale I'd never had access to before. My first week, I met with the commander, Vice Admiral Patricia Hendricks, a career aviator with 32 years in uniform and a reputation for being both brilliant and terrifying. She sat behind her desk, reading my file, while I stood at attention. "At ease, Captain." She gestured to a chair. "Sit." I sat. "I've read about your training program," she said, closing the file. "Impressive work. Ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. Ma'am, you're proposing mandatory training for every junior officer in the Pacific Fleet. That's tens of thousands of people. The logistics alone are staggering. And you want to do it in 18 months. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" It was a simple question, but I knew it carried weight. This wasn't about justifying the program. It was about proving I understood what I was asking for. "Because the culture we have now isn't sustainable," I said. "We're seeing increased friction between services, decreased respect for rank and experience, and a generation of officers who don't understand what joint operations actually require. If we don't address it now, systematically, we're going to pay for it in mission failure down the line." She leaned back, studying me. "You really believe that?" "Yes, ma'am. I do." A long pause. Then, "All right. You've got your 18 months. But I'm assigning you a staff. 3 officers, full-time, dedicated to this program. You'll report progress quarterly. And if I see this becoming a check-the-box exercise instead of real cultural change, I'm pulling the plug." "Clear?" "Crystal, ma'am." "Good. Get to work." I left her office with a mix of relief and terror. I had resources. I had authority. And I had 18 months to prove this wasn't a waste of time. The staff she assigned me was small but capable. Lieutenant Commander Jason Park, a former instructor pilot with a knack for curriculum design. Lieutenant Emily Carter, the young ensign who'd approached me during the first training session, now assigned as my assistant. And, to my surprise, Major Ryan Cooper, who'd requested a transfer to join the team. We met in a cramped office on the 3rd floor, surrounded by whiteboards covered in timelines and logistics notes. Cooper looked nervous. Ma'am, he said, I know I'm probably the last person you expected to see. You requested this assignment? Yes, ma'am. I want to be part of fixing what I helped break. And I think I can reach junior officers in a way senior officers can't. I've been where they are. I've made the mistakes they're going to make. I can speak to that. I considered him. He was right. And having someone with his perspective, someone who'd been publicly corrected and grown from it, would make the program more credible, not less. All right, Major. Welcome to the team. He exhaled, visibly relieved. Over the next 6 months, we built the infrastructure. Standardized curriculum. Train-the-trainer sessions for instructors across the fleet. Online modules for remote units. Feedback mechanisms. Accountability metrics. It was exhausting, detail-oriented work that required navigating bureaucracy, egos, and budget constraints at every turn. But it was also working. By October, we'd rolled the program out to 12 bases. By December, 23. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Incident reports were down. Cross-branch collaboration was up. And junior officers were starting to talk about respect and professionalism like it mattered, not because they were forced to, but because they understood why it should. One afternoon in late December, I got a call from Captain Adler. He was still stationed at the original base where this had all started, now commanding a joint training squadron. Captain Bruno, he said, I wanted you to hear this directly. We just completed a 6-month evaluation of cross-branch operations, and the data is remarkable. Miscommunication incidents down 60%. Efficiency up across the board. And every single junior officer we surveyed said the respect training made a difference. I closed my eyes, let that sink in. That's good to hear, Captain. It's more than good. It's proof. What you built works. And it's spreading. I've had requests from Army and Marine Corps units asking to join the program. This isn't just Navy anymore. It's joint force-wide. That was always the goal. I know. I'm just saying, you did it. You actually did it. After we hung up, I sat alone in my office, staring at the data reports, the survey results, the testimonials from junior officers who felt seen and respected for the first time in their careers. And I thought about that night at the bar. About the lieutenant who'd mocked me. About the choice I'd made to walk away instead of retaliating. If I'd made a scene that night, Lieutenant Cooper would have been reprimanded, maybe discharged. The story would have ended there. But I'd chosen differently. I'd chosen to build instead of destroy. And now, 18 months later, tens of thousands of officers were benefiting from that choice. My father was right. Leadership isn't about one big decision. It's about 1,000 small ones, made consistently over time. Emily knocked on my door. Ma'am, Admiral Hendricks wants to see you. I stood, straightened my uniform, and walked down the hall. The Admiral was waiting in her office, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Captain Bruno. Sit. I sat. She slid a folder across the desk. Your 18 months are up. This is the final evaluation report. Read it. I opened the folder. The first page was a summary. Cross-branch respect and professionalism training initiative, final assessment. Recommendation, expand to all DoD services. Designate as mandatory component of officer development pipeline. I looked up. You did it, Hendricks said. You built something that works. And now it's going to become standard across the entire Department of Defense. Congratulations, Captain. I didn't know what to say. For once, I was speechless. Don't get comfortable, she continued. This is just the beginning. You're going to spend the next year traveling, briefing senior leaders, defending this program to people who think it's unnecessary. You ready for that? I thought about my father. About Sarah. About every officer who'd believed in this work when it was just an idea. Yes, ma'am. I'm ready. She smiled, small, rare, genuine. Good. Because this is your legacy now, Bruno. Make it count. I left her office and walked back through the building, past the conference rooms and cubicles, past the officers hunched over computers and the chiefs coordinating logistics. And I realized this was my mission now. Not flying. Not combat. Building culture. Shaping the future. It wasn't what I'd imagined 20 years ago. But it was exactly what I was meant to do. 2 years later, I stood in the same parade ground where I'd been promoted to captain, watching as another officer, Lieutenant Commander Emily Carter, received her own promotion. She'd grown into her role, become one of the most effective instructors in the training program, and earned early promotion to O4 based on her leadership and impact. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, she found me near the flagpole. "Ma'am," she said, saluting. "Thank you for being here." I returned the salute. "Wouldn't have missed it, Commander." "Congratulations. I wouldn't be here without you. Without the program. You earned this, Emily. Don't diminish that." She smiled, the same thing I'd told Major Cooper 2 years ago. I learned from the best. We walked together toward the parking lot, and she asked the question I'd been expecting. "What's next for you, ma'am?" I'd been asking myself the same thing. I was 45 now, a captain with 23 years of service. The training program was institutionalized, running smoothly under new leadership. My role had shifted from builder to advisor, and I was starting to feel the pull toward something else. Maybe a final operational command. Maybe retirement and a second career teaching at the War College. Maybe something I hadn't imagined yet. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm not worried about it." "That's very zen of you, ma'am." I laughed. "I've earned the right to be zen." That evening, I drove out to the overlook where I used to sit as a junior officer, watching the flight line and remembering why I'd chosen this life. The sun was setting, the sky painted in brilliant pinks and oranges, and I could see the silhouettes of aircraft lined up on the tarmac, F-18s, F-35s, helicopters, cargo planes. The machinery of service, still running, still vital. My phone rang. It was Sarah. "Hey," she said. "I heard Emily made O4. That's fantastic." "It is. She's going to do great things. Like someone else I know." I smiled. "How are things with you?" "Busy. Complicated. The usual. But I wanted to call because I heard a rumor." "What kind of rumor?" "The kind that says you're being considered for flag rank." I went still. "Flag rank. Admiral. Oh, 7. It was the level my father had once said was reserved for people who'd proven they could shape the entire service, not just their corner of it. "It's just a rumor, Sarah." "Is it?" "Because I heard it from someone in a position to know. And Megan, if anyone deserves it, it's you." I didn't respond. I was thinking about everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd learned. And I was thinking about my father, standing on that carrier deck all those years ago, telling a 12-year-old girl that she could do anything if she was willing to work for it. "I don't know if I want it," I said quietly. "Why not?" "Because flag rank means politics. It means compromise. It means spending more time managing bureaucracy than leading people. And I don't know if that's who I am anymore." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what I think? I think you've earned the right to choose. If you want flag rank, go for it. If you don't, retire with your head held high. But don't make the decision based on fear. Make it based on what you want your legacy to be." "When did you become a therapist?" "I've always been a therapist. You just don't listen." I laughed, genuinely. "Fair point." We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing, about everything. When we hung up, I sat alone in the gathering darkness, thinking about legacy. About what I wanted the next chapter to look like. And I realized I'd spent 23 years proving I could fly, fight, and lead. I'd built a training program that was changing culture across the entire military. I'd mentored officers who were now mentoring others. I'd turned a moment of disrespect into a movement towards something better. Maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need flag rank to validate what I'd accomplished. Maybe I could retire, teach, write, spend the rest of my life helping shape the next generation without the weight of uniform politics. Or maybe I could take one more step, one more rank, and use that platform to push for even bigger changes, reforms to promotion systems, updates to training standards, advocacy for the officers who still didn't have a voice. I didn't have to decide tonight. But I knew I would decide soon. And whatever I chose, it would be on my terms. I started the car and drove back to base housing. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a package on the doorstep, no return address, just my name. I brought it inside, opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photo, my father and me, taken the day I graduated from flight school. We were both in uniform, both grinning, his arm around my shoulders. And tucked into the corner of the frame was a handwritten note on Chief Petty Officer stationery. Megan found this while cleaning out Dad's things. He kept it on his desk until the day he died. Thought you should have it. He'd be so proud of you. Your brother, Marcus. I sat down at my kitchen table, holding the frame, staring at my father's face. And I heard his voice, clear as if he were standing beside me. Rank is responsibility. The higher you go, the more people depend on you to get it right. I set the photo on the shelf beside my other insignia, medals, and commendations. Tomorrow, I'd make calls. I'd talk to mentors. I'd figure out what came next. But tonight, I let myself sit in the quiet, surrounded by the accumulated weight of 23 years of service, and I let myself be proud. Not of the rank. Not of the medals. Not of the program I'd built. I was proud of the choices I'd made. The moment I walked away from anger and chose to build instead. The moment I gave a young lieutenant a second chance instead of ending his career. The moment I decided that respect mattered more than retaliation. Those were the moments that defined me. Those were the moments that mattered. And as I sat there, looking at my father's photo, I made my decision. I was going to keep going. One more rank. One more push. One more opportunity to shape the culture I believed in. Not because I needed validation, but because there was still work to do. And I was the person to do it. The promotion to Rear Admiral came 18 months later, on a crisp December morning that reminded me of the day I'd made captain. Same parade ground. Same flags snapping in the wind. Different weight on my shoulders, literally and figuratively. The stars pinned to my collar felt heavier than any insignia I'd worn before, and not because of the medal. Admiral Hendricks performed the ceremony herself, flanked by Vice Admiral Marcus Webb from Navy Personnel Command and Rear Admiral Robert Hayes, the man who'd first supported my training program. Sarah stood in the front row, beaming. Emily Carter was there, now a full commander, leading her own training squadron. And in the back, standing with a group of junior officers, I saw Major Ryan Cooper, now Lieutenant Colonel Cooper, recently promoted and assigned to Air Force Doctrine Command. He caught my eye and gave a small, respectful nod. I nodded back. The ceremony was brief. Hendricks read the citation, highlighting not just my operational record, but the cultural reforms I'd championed, the training programs I'd built, the thousands of officers whose careers had been shaped by the work I'd done. When she pinned the stars on my shoulders, she leaned in and whispered, "Don't let this go to your head, Bruno. You've still got work to do." I smiled. "Yes, ma'am." The reception was smaller this time, mostly senior officers, a few close friends, people who'd been part of the journey. I moved through the crowd mechanically, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, thinking about what came next. My new assignment was already waiting, Deputy Commander for Personnel and Readiness, Naval Air Forces. It was a massive portfolio oversight of officer development, training standards, promotion boards, and cultural initiatives across the entire aviation community. It was exactly the platform I needed to push for the reforms I'd been planning for years. But it was also terrifying. Flag rank meant scrutiny. It meant every decision I made would be analyzed, criticized, second-guessed. It meant living under a microscope and accepting that I'd never make everyone happy. Sarah found me near the window, handed me a glass of water. "You look like you're about to throw up." "I'm not going to throw up." "You're absolutely going to throw up." I laughed to spite myself. "I'm fine. Just processing." Processing what? The fact that I'm now responsible for the careers of thousands of officers. The fact that my decisions will shape the Navy for the next decade. The fact that I can't afford to screw this up. "Megan." She put a hand on my arm. "You've been preparing for this your entire career. You know what needs to change. You have the authority to change it. And you have people who trust you to get it right. Stop overthinking and just do the work." I looked at her. "When did you become the voice of reason?" "I've always been the voice of reason. You just don't listen." Fair point. Later that evening, after the ceremony had ended and the crowd had dispersed, I sat alone in my new office, larger than any I'd had before, with windows overlooking the harbor and a desk big enough to land a helicopter on. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo, my father in his dress blues, standing on the deck of a carrier, looking out at the horizon. I thought about him, about everything he'd taught me, about the moment at that air show when he told me I could do anything if I was willing to work for it. I'd worked for it. For 25 years, I'd worked. And now I was here, flag rank, senior leadership, the opportunity to shape the future of naval aviation in ways I'd only dreamed about as a junior officer. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. Because the work I'd started, the cultural reforms, the training programs, the push for real accountability, that work was far from finished. In some ways, it was just getting started. My first priority was clear: expand the training program beyond junior officers. Make it mandatory for mid-level leaders, the O4s and O5s who set the tone for their squadrons, who mentored the next generation, who had the power to either reinforce the culture we were building or undermine it. If we could reach them, truly reach them, we could create lasting change. My second priority was harder: reform the promotion system. Make it less about time and grade and more about demonstrated leadership. Create pathways for officers who'd made mistakes early in their careers, but had grown from them. Ensure that diversity of thought, of background, of experience was valued, not just tolerated. It was ambitious. Maybe too ambitious. But I didn't have time to play it safe. I opened my laptop and started drafting a proposal. Subject line: Cultural Reform Initiative, Phase 2. I wrote for hours, outlining objectives, proposing timelines, anticipating objections. When I finally hit send at 0100 hours, I felt a mix of exhaustion and clarity. This was my mission now. Not flying. Not combat. Shaping the institution that had shaped me. My phone buzzed, a text from Lieutenant Colonel Cooper. Admiral Bruno, congratulations on your promotion. You've inspired more people than you know. Keep fighting the good fight. Ryan, I read it twice, then set the phone down. He was right. This was a fight. Not against an enemy, but against complacency, against inertia, against the institutional resistance to change that plagued every large organization. But it was a fight worth having. Because on the other side of it was a military where respect was baseline, where professionalism mattered, where every officer, regardless of branch, gender, or background, could serve with dignity and pride. I thought about that night at the bar. About the young lieutenant who'd mocked me, not knowing who I was or what I'd done. About the choice I'd made to walk away instead of retaliating. That choice had led here. To this office. To this rank. To this opportunity. And I wasn't going to waste it. I stood, looked out at the harbor, at the ships silhouetted against the night sky, at the lights of the base stretching out toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, young officers were training, learning, becoming the leaders who'd carry this institution forward. And I was going to make sure they had the tools, the culture, and the support they needed to succeed. Not because it was easy. Because it was necessary. I turned off the lights and walked out into the cool night air. Tomorrow, there'd be briefings, meetings, decisions to make. But tonight, I let myself feel the weight of the stars on my shoulders and the responsibility they represented. My father used to say that leadership isn't about glory. It's about service. About showing up every day and doing the work that matters, even when no one's watching. I'd been showing up for 25 years. And I wasn't stopping now. Respect isn't given by rank or by age. It's built, one choice at a time. Even at a bar. Even off-duty. It still matters here when no one's watching. And I was going to spend the rest of my career making sure that message reached every corner of the military, one officer, one conversation, one reform at a time. Because that's what real leadership looks like. And that's what my father taught me. That's where I drew the line and why I chose to build something better instead of chasing payback. Your turn. When were you publicly disrespected, and how did you handle it? What's one boundary you enforced that changed a workplace or team? If you've served, how do you keep cross-branch respect real, not just a slogan? If this resonated, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Drop your story in the comments, I read them, and tell me where you're tuning in from. The next chapter starts with your voice.